Buying a car for most Americans is the second largest purchase that they'll make in their life, right behind buying a house. And as cars have become more and more expensive, the $1,000 car payment is becoming more and more normal. And as a result, it seems as though there's more and more people that are stretching themselves far too thin whenever it comes to their car loan. And this has led to an increase in auto loan delinquencies and vehicle repossessions. And so this of course begs the question of how do you know what type of car or what price point you can actually afford? Now, if you ask 10 different people in the financial space this question, you're probably going to get one of two different answers. You'll either get the Dave Ramsey approach, which is that you shouldn't buy a car until you can buy that car in cash.
If you can't pay for it in cash, in total, on the spot, cash on the barrelhead, you can't afford it, whatever it is.
Or they're going to say that you shouldn't spend more than 20% of your take-home pay on car-related expenses. So this would include things like your car payment, your maintenance, repairs, insurance, and gas. So everything revolving your car. And while both of these answers can be true and helpful depending on your specific financial situation, the truth is neither one of these answers take into account some of the important context that can either make or break a car purchase. And these are really the three questions that you should be asking yourself if you're wanting to try to decide what you can really afford. What is your take-home pay? What are your monthly expenses and overall financial picture? And what type of car are you wanting to buy? The first question, what is your take-home pay? So how much are you making after taxes? This would include any types of side hustles or additional income streams that you have. The second question, what are your expenses? This is probably the most important question that you should be asking, because the reality is your monthly expenses is ultimately going to dictate what you can or cannot afford. Because somebody who makes $5,000 a month take home but only has $2,000 in monthly expenses is going to actually be able to afford more car than somebody who makes $10,000 per month but has $9,500 in monthly expenses. Your expenses ultimately dictate how much you can allocate to a car, and so that's going to be an incredibly important question to answer. And last but not least, what type of car do you want to buy? Because let's face it, not all cars are created equal. And so today I don't actually want to go over the cookie cutter math that you can use in order to calculate which car you can afford, because there are tons of other videos on YouTube that already have gone over that subject. One of my favorite videos on this subject is one by the YouTube creator Humphrey Yang. I will include a link to that video down in the description below. Instead, today I want to talk about these other factors that are oftentimes left out of the financial formula for affordability. So the question of how much you make is a relatively straightforward question. Like I mentioned earlier, you'll want to take into account any money that you have coming in. So from your W-2 job, from a side hustle that you have, any type of income stream that is bringing in money. You'll of course want to take into account taxes, and if you are somebody who is self-employed, you want to make sure to allocate money to your taxes each and every month and take that into account. Next is the question of expenses, and like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be an incredibly important question to answer because what your expenses are is going to dictate how much you can ultimately afford. And whenever it comes to calculating your expenses, you can do this by putting how much you spend into one of a few categories. First is your non-negotiables, so expenses that have to be paid no matter what. So things like your home mortgage, your rent, electricity, gas, your internet bill, things like that. These are expenses that I would put in the must-spend category. You have to spend money on them no matter what. Next is your need-to-pay expenses. These definitely aren't considered necessities, but they are things that you like buying, and thus they must be taken into account. So things like Netflix or Hulu subscriptions, going out to eat, entertainment costs, things like that. While these aren't necessities and they can be cut back if you need to, they are still things that should be taken into account because they can add up quickly. And then you also have your overall financial picture, so your debt and saving situation. I personally believe that you should be actively contributing to savings and retirement funds before you think about buying an expensive car. I also think that buying a car when you have bad debt, like credit card debt, is a recipe for disaster. The way that we should look about buying a new or used car isn't just the cost of that car on a month-by-month basis, but it's also the opportunity of the cost as well. If you're stretching yourself thin with a car purchase, you're not only having to pay for that car each and every month, but chances are this also means that you're taking away funds from either retirement or savings in an effort to afford that car that you're wanting to buy. This is not a good thing, and it really should be avoided at all costs. Let's use myself for an example. My husband and I contribute consistently to savings and retirement funds. We don't have any bad debt outside of my husband's car, but we did finance his 2020 GT500, which we owe $1,300 per month on. If we would have invested about $1,300 per month into the stock market instead of spending that money on my husband's car, we would have been able to make about $31,000 in that same amount of time. And we could have potentially made even more if we would have just kept that money into the stock market and allowed for it to grow for the next 10 to 20 years. Whenever we bought HP's GT500, not only did we we have to get very comfortable with the fact that we were having to spend $1,300 per month on this car, but we also had to be comfortable with not contributing that money into other investments, like more Turo cars, a real estate property, or our retirement fund. And based off of HP&I's income level and our goals, we were okay with making that decision. But whenever you're looking to buy a car, you really should look at it from the full financial picture. How is this purchase going to impact you not only short term, but also long term as well? And then this of course brings us to the topic of which car should you buy and why this question is so incredibly important. Because let's face it, not all cars are created equal. Let's again use HP's GT500 as an example. We bought this car almost exactly 1 year ago, and today we could sell this car for very close to what we paid for it, which means that we could have owned it for an entire year for an extremely low cost, basically just the cost of insurance, maintenance, and gas, which comes out to in total a couple $1,000s. But if we were to have instead bought something like a brand new Ford Explorer or a Maserati, this exact same thing wouldn't have been true, and we would have lost a lot of money over the last year rather than having the car retain its value. And had we bought one of these more depreciating cars, we probably would have lost 10 to 20%, if not more, over the last year. The car you buy matters, and here's how you can determine whether the car that you're wanting to buy is actually worth purchasing. Pay attention to your finance terms. A car purchase with a 10 to 20% interest rate will never ever make sense. Try to get as low of a rate as possible. Today, the average rate is about 6 to 7% for a new car and 10 to 11% for a used, but you can get less with a credit union. When justifying a car purchase, you should always have in mind how much you're going to purchase that car for versus how much you'll be able to sell that car for later. And a high interest rate will basically take that formula and throw it out the window. A high interest rate makes even an affordable car an unaffordable one. So you want to make sure to take rates into account whenever you're purchasing your next vehicle, because it truly can be a deal breaker. The second question is, how long are you planning on keeping this for, and how much can you expect for this car to be worth whenever it comes time to sell it? Believe it or not, you can buy a car and almost use it as a slight savings account. Depending on what type of car you buy, you could buy it, keep it for a few years, and sell it for a profit, or alternatively, and more realistically, you could buy a car, keep it for a few years, and then sell it for the same price you bought it for. This is of course dictated by what type of car you buy, how many miles you put on it, and the condition at the time you bought it and sold it. For example, I could buy this 2023 Toyota 4Runner TRD Pro with 1,141 miles on it for $64,879. You could theoretically buy this car, drive it for a year, and then sell it for just slightly below what you paid for it. Like this 2022 4Runner that has the same trim, different color, 1 year older, and 42,000 miles more, but it's only selling for $3,079 less. Or this 2022 Honda Civic EX with 10,000 miles, which you can buy for $27,999. You could then drive this car for 2 years, put 20,000 miles on it, and sell it for $1,000 less, like this 2020 model with 30,000 miles selling for $26,900. You can save a lot of money when buying a car by taking into account when you're buying that car and at what price point you're buying it for, as well as when you want to sell that car and what you can expect to sell that car for at that time. These are great ways to ensure that you're not leaving any money on the table. Alternatively, you can also just buy cars that have low historical depreciation rates, like a Jeep or even a 4Runner. Another option is to look at a depreciation curve and buy according to a vehicle's curve. If you buy a car at the lowest point in the depreciation curve or at a lower point, you can buy a car, drive it for a few years, put a lot of miles on it, and then sell that car for the same price you bought it for. This is the same strategy that I use whenever I'm buying cars for my Turo fleet, and it's a great way to make sure that you're not leaving any money on the table. And of course, you'll also want to take into account maintenance. Maintenance costs can make or break your vehicle purchase, and if you buy a car at a great price, but it is a pain to upkeep and it's constantly breaking down, well, you're ultimately going to end up losing money. Cars that you purchase at a high interest rate that depreciate fast and cost an arm and a leg to maintain, well, that is a recipe for disaster. For example, a BMW 7 Series. 5-year depreciation on a BMW 7 Series is 56.9%. A BMW 7 Series also has higher than average maintenance costs and will cost about $7,200 in maintenance and repairs during the first 5 years. This is more than comparable models. You buy a brand new 7 Series at a 7% interest rate and you are in a bad situation. The point is that whenever we talk about this 20% rule, it can be a helpful rule of thumb in gauging roughly how much car you should be looking at based on your income. But the truth is, it doesn't take into account all of the different aspects of the equation that play an even more important role. The The truth is, there are so many different components to figuring out exactly how much car you can afford, and your take-home pay is just one of those different factors. And while this video certainly isn't going to tell you exactly which car you can or cannot afford, it is going to point out some of the different factors that you should keep in mind yourself to ensure that you're not only buying a car that you can afford, but you're also buying one that won't impact your financial future as well. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.